Emma Caldwell's pulse quickened as she stepped off the plane, the towering skyline of New York City stretching before her. 7 years had passed since she was cast aside by the man she once trusted, discarded like an afterthought as his ruthless mistress slithered into the life Emma built. Alone, pregnant, and heartbroken, she had fled with nothing but the will to survive. But time had changed her. Now, she was back. The city that once whispered about her downfall would soon witness her rise. Determination burned in her chest, fierce and unshakable. She wasn't just returning, she was reclaiming everything that was stolen. And for those who had wronged her, there would be no mercy. Emma had never been one to believe in fate, but meeting Ethan Sterling felt like destiny. Born into a working-class family in the suburbs of Chicago, she spent her college years juggling multiple jobs while caring for her aging parents. She had dreams bigger than the life she had been given. One scorching summer night, those dreams took her to a charity gala at the prestigious Sterling Grand Hotel in Manhattan. She had received a scholarship invitation to present her research on empowering women in underserved communities. The event dripped with wealth. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and an air of untouchable luxury. The guests moved with effortless confidence as though they owned the world. Dressed in a borrowed gown that barely fit, Emma felt like an outsider, but she reminded herself why she was there. This was her chance to raise awareness for something that mattered. As she lingered by the refreshment table, mentally rehearsing her speech, the atmosphere shifted. Ethan Sterling had entered the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, exuding a quiet confidence that commanded attention, he moved through the crowd with ease. He was laughing at something, an effortless, rich sound, but the second his eyes met Emma's, the world seemed to narrow. For a moment, it was just the two of them. "Hi," he said, approaching with a subtle tilt of his head. His voice was smooth, laced with curiosity. Emma's cheeks warmed. "I'm Ethan. First time at one of these?" She nodded, willing herself to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I'm here as a scholarship recipient. I'm presenting on community initiatives." His lips quirked into a small smile. "Impressive. You don't seem like the kind to be intimidated by a room full of millionaires." Emma had no idea then, no way of knowing, just how much this man would change her life. The conversation stretched far beyond what Emma Caldwell had expected. What started as polite small talk soon unraveled into something far more intriguing. Ethan Sterling wasn't just another privileged heir. Despite inheriting a massive trust fund, he had carved out his own space in the tech world, pioneering a groundbreaking data security platform that had the industry's biggest investors lining up. His confidence was undeniable, but it was his sincerity that caught Emma off guard. He listened intently as she spoke about her passion for community programs, asking thoughtful questions that made it clear he wasn't just humoring her. By the time the night ended, she was captivated. And Ethan? He seemed equally drawn to her. She hesitated when he asked for her number. Men like him didn't pursue women like her, at least not for anything serious, but against her better judgment, she gave it to him. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made good on his promise to keep in touch. He sent her articles on social initiatives, playful texts that made her smile, and invitations to exclusive events that felt worlds apart from her modest upbringing. Each interaction left her feeling something unfamiliar, wanted. Still, she reminded herself to stay cautious. She had seen too many people fall for illusions of love, only to end up shattered. Yet, despite her best efforts to resist, Ethan pulled her deeper into his orbit. Their dates weren't just extravagant. Private rooftop dinners, front-row seats at Broadway premieres, weekends at a secluded lake house. What truly captivated Emma were the moments in between. The long walks through Central Park, deep conversations about their childhoods, nights spent volunteering at food shelters. With him, she felt seen. She felt safe. And then one evening, beneath the warm glow of city lights, Ethan made a promise. They had returned to the small cafe where they'd shared their first official date, the hum of conversation around them fading into the background. When Ethan reached across the table, his fingers lacing through hers, there was no hesitation in his eyes, only certainty. "Marry me," he whispered. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, doubt threatened to creep in. Could she truly belong in his world? Could love between them survive the weight of their differences? But then, she looked into his eyes, earnest, unwavering, and she knew. Yes, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. At that moment, she believed in forever. Little did she know, forever would shatter sooner than she ever imagined. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. Set against the breathtaking backdrop of a private estate in Napa Valley, the ceremony was a vision of elegance and excess. Guests arrived in chauffeured town cars, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping on vintage champagne as they marveled at the opulent decor. High-profile CEOs, Hollywood elites, and even a senator's wife filled the guest list, ensuring that the event would be talked about for years to come. Emma Caldwell stood at the altar in a custom-made gown, her fingers wrapped tightly around Ethan Sterling's hands as they exchanged vows beneath an arch of cascading white roses. In that moment, she believed she had found her forever. The cameras flashed, the string quartet played, and the whispers of admiration swirled around them. But not all eyes were warm. William Sterling, Ethan's father, stood at the edge of the celebration, his expression unreadable. A titan in the finance world, he had spent decades building an empire, and he had little patience for distractions, especially ones he deemed unworthy of the Sterling name. Emma had always sensed his disapproval. He never voiced it outright, never openly criticized her background, but she felt the weight of his judgment in the way his gaze lingered a second too long. In the polite yet distant way he acknowledged her presence. Ethan dismissed her concerns with a casual shrug. "My father is old-fashioned, but he'll come around," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just give him time." Emma wanted to believe him. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan's business flourished, securing multi-million-dollar deals that placed him at the pinnacle of the tech world. Their life in Manhattan was a dream. Lavish penthouses, extravagant galas, and private jets whisking them away for weekend getaways. But while the world saw a billionaire husband and his radiant wife behind closed doors, Emma focused on something far more meaningful. She threw herself into philanthropy, using her influence to support education programs for underprivileged youth, fund women's shelters, and launch initiatives that provided job training for struggling families. The tabloids fixated on her glamorous lifestyle, but Emma cared little for the headlines. And yet, despite everything, one thing remained unchanged: William Sterling's cold demeanor. No matter how many events she organized, no matter how many causes she championed, she could never shake the feeling that he was waiting for her to fail. Then, one scorching July afternoon, Ethan walked through their front door, a stack of documents in hand and a triumphant grin on his face. "Emma, you need to meet someone," he said. "She's going to change everything." Ethan Sterling had always surrounded himself with the best talent, and when he introduced Emma Caldwell to his new business manager, he spoke of her like she was a miracle worker. "Vanessa Monroe," he said, handing Emma a portfolio filled with glowing recommendations. "She's turned around companies twice our size. I thought you'd want to meet her, maybe even work together on some of your initiatives." Emma smiled politely, extending a hand as Vanessa swept into the room. She was striking, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding an effortless charm that seemed almost rehearsed. Her golden blonde hair shimmered under the office lights, and her smile was practiced perfection. "I've heard so much about you," Vanessa gushed, her voice warm, her eyes sharp. "Your work in philanthropy is inspiring. I'd love to collaborate sometime." Emma nodded, but something about Vanessa unsettled her. It wasn't jealousy. She had no reason to question Ethan's loyalty. It was more a quiet, instinctual unease, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, but she brushed it off. Vanessa wasted no time proving her value. Within days, she restructured Ethan's travel schedule, streamlined business operations, and refined the company's branding. Even Ethan, who prided himself on his keen judgment, seemed impressed. "She's brilliant," he told Emma one night over dinner. "She sees opportunities where others don't." Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that Vanessa was just an ambitious professional with a knack for efficiency. So when Vanessa expressed interest in supporting Emma's charity work, offering to manage fundraising logistics, Emma reluctantly welcomed the help. At first, everything seemed fine. Vanessa praised Emma's generosity, insisted on handling financials to maximize donations, and positioned herself as a valuable ally. But small things started to gnaw at Emma. Ethan's late nights at the office became more frequent. At first, he blamed emergency meetings, last-minute investor calls, and business trips that couldn't be rescheduled. When Emma asked about details, Ethan waved them off. "It's all in Vanessa's domain now," he assured her. "She's a genius at handling these things." Emma tried to silence the doubt creeping into her mind. She reminded herself that trust was the foundation of marriage. After all, she was the billionaire's wife. And yet, deep in her gut, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just opened the door to something dangerous. Emma Caldwell sat up in bed, fingers trembling as she turned the collar of Ethan Sterling's shirt under the dim bedroom light. A smear of lipstick, bold and unmistakable, stained the crisp fabric, a color she never wore. Her breath hitched. Ethan stirred beside her, half asleep, mumbling something incoherent. "Someone at the office hugged me," he murmured, shifting as if the conversation didn't matter. Emma clenched her jaw. A chill seeped into her bones, an icy confirmation of the dread she had been pushing aside for weeks. She told herself not to jump to conclusions. But the signs were there, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. Conversations at social events grew shorter. People in Ethan's inner circle exchanged wary glances when she entered a room. And Vanessa Monroe? She had positioned herself dangerously close, always lingering in Ethan's orbit. Always finding a way to cut into their conversations with a well-timed comment or an unnecessary touch on his arm. Emma told herself she wasn't the jealous type. But she wasn't blind either. Then one afternoon, everything became painfully clear. She had just returned from a charity event, stepping into their penthouse with shopping bags in hand when she saw them. Ethan and Vanessa standing in the foyer, too close, their conversation hushed. They jumped apart the moment she entered. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, fumbling through a rushed explanation about reviewing contracts. Vanessa simply smiled, that slow, knowing smile that sent Emma's stomach twisting. And in that moment, she knew. Vanessa wasn't just a business manager. She was a predator. Emma's fingers curled protectively over her stomach. She had just found out she was pregnant, 8 weeks along. She had planned to surprise Ethan after confirming the baby's health, imagining a moment of joy, a shared dream of the family they had promised to build together. Now, she wasn't sure if she should tell him at all. She convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, this baby would remind Ethan of what truly mattered. That fatherhood would ground him, pull him away from whatever influence Vanessa had over him. It was a desperate hope, but it was all she had left. That evening, she dressed carefully for dinner, smoothing down the fabric of her dress over the barely there curve of her belly. Her heart pounded with equal parts excitement and fear. She had to believe Ethan was still the man she had fallen in love with. Because if she was wrong, this wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about their child. Emma Caldwell never got the chance to share her news the way she had envisioned. Instead, fate ripped that moment away in the cruelest way possible. That evening, she arrived at Sterling Enterprises, clutching a small gift bag. Inside, neatly wrapped in tissue paper, were tiny baby booties and a handwritten note that read, "You're gonna be a dad." She walked through the gleaming lobby with determined strides, ignoring the curious glances from employees who still recognized her as the billionaire's wife. The receptionist hesitated, but ultimately led her to Ethan Sterling's private suite. Emma reached the door and froze. Through the narrow pane of glass, she saw them. Ethan and Vanessa Monroe. Too close, his hand resting on her waist, her fingers brushing the lapel of his suit. The unmistakable tension between them sent a violent shudder through Emma's body. For a moment, she stood paralyzed, her world unraveling in real time. Then, something inside her snapped. She pushed the door open. Ethan stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Vanessa, ever composed, took a calculated step away, smoothing down the front of her blouse with infuriating calm. The scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air, a scent Emma had never worn. Silence suffocated the room. Emma's knuckles whitened as she clenched the gift bag, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I came here to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "But I guess there's nothing left to say." Ethan's gaze flickered to the bag in her hands. He caught sight of the baby booties peeking through the tissue paper, and his expression twisted. Shock, regret, something bordering on guilt. He reached for her, but Vanessa's hand on his shoulder kept him in place. Emma felt sick. They were a unit, a solid front, and she was the outsider in her own marriage. Unable to bear another second in that room, she turned and bolted. Ethan called her name, his voice desperate, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. The moment she slid into the back of a cab, hot tears blurred her vision. One hand cradled her abdomen instinctively, fear twisting inside her. She had no plan, no idea where she would go. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Staying with a cheating husband and his ruthless mistress wasn't an option. That night, she made her decision. She would walk away. For herself. For her child. Emma Caldwell paced by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, her hands clenched into fists. The city lights stretched endlessly before her, but all she could see was the wreckage of the life she had built. Her body was rigid, her breath unsteady, her heart a battlefield of emotions. Hours passed before Ethan Sterling finally walked through the door. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, his face etched with guilt. "Emma," he murmured, stepping toward her with hesitant hands. "I messed up." She took a step back, the distance between them no longer just physical. "Don't," she said coldly. "Before you say another word, I need to know, why? And are you still the man I thought I married?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. He tried to explain, grasping at excuses, something about a moment of weakness, a meaningless kiss, but every word he uttered only stoked the fire inside her. She took a slow breath, then dropped the truth between them like a thunderclap. "I'm pregnant." The color drained from Ethan's face. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw something close to regret, maybe even fear. But before he could speak, a slow clap echoed through the foyer. Vanessa Monroe strolled in as if she belonged there, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Why are you here?" Emma's voice trembled with rage. Vanessa barely spared her a glance, her attention fixed on Ethan. "Because unlike some people, I actually support his vision." She folded her arms, tilting her head in mock pity. "I sacrificed everything to help Ethan succeed. And you? You've been clinging to your feel-good charity projects like they actually mean something in his world." Emma's nails dug into her palms, but she refused to crumble. "Get out." Vanessa laughed, slow and cruel. "Not for long, darling. You don't have what it takes to stay by his side." Emma turned to Ethan, giving him one last chance. "Tell her to leave," she demanded, her voice like ice. "Or tell me where you stand." Ethan hesitated. That was all she needed to see. "I might be pregnant, but I refuse to be pitied or played with," she said, her voice shaking with restrained fury. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. Tears burned down her cheeks as she grabbed a suitcase, throwing in whatever she could. Less than an hour later, she was gone. The city swallowed her up, but she didn't care. She had nothing left, except the tiny life growing inside her. And that was enough. Emma Caldwell walked away from the life she had once cherished. She left behind the designer gowns, the diamond-studded evenings, and the illusion of a perfect marriage. None of it mattered anymore. All that mattered now was her unborn child. The first few weeks were brutal. She found refuge in a cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of Brooklyn, its peeling wallpaper and rusted sink a far cry from the luxury she once knew. The air smelled of street food from the vendors below, their voices blending with the honking traffic. She lived off her modest savings, refusing to touch Ethan Sterling's bank accounts or accept any hush money. Pride was all she had left. And she refused to let them take that from her too. Her pregnancy progressed, but so did the challenges. Morning sickness hit with a vengeance, making even the simplest tasks exhausting. Worse, the scandal followed her like a shadow. Gossip columns splashed her name across headlines. Pregnant wife flees billionaire husband as his mistress takes her place. The whispers stung. Former acquaintances, those who once flocked to her side at charity galas, now avoided her calls. A few old friends offered support, but most were too afraid to oppose the powerful Sterling name, especially with Vanessa Monroe using it to her advantage. Emma felt alone, but she refused to be defeated. Determined to build something for herself, she took a job as an administrative assistant at a small financial firm. The pay was meager, but she threw herself into the work, using her skills in event planning and budgeting to prove her worth. Slowly, the confidence she thought she had lost began to return. More than once, she considered going back, for the sake of her unborn child, if nothing else. But each time she remembered Ethan's silence, the way Vanessa had smirked, as if she had already won. That memory hardened her resolve. She would not raise her child in a house built on lies. By her 3rd month of pregnancy, she decided to channel her heartbreak into something new. She had always dreamed of starting a business, something meaningful. With the little savings she had left, and the unwavering support of her closest friend, Megan, she launched an online store selling sustainable baby products. It started small, featuring handcrafted items from local artisans. She named it Noah and Eden, the name of her future son, guiding her like a whisper of fate. She had no idea then, no way of knowing, that this business would be the very thing that changed everything. Emma Caldwell poured every ounce of energy into her business, refining her brand, forging relationships with suppliers, and expanding her customer base. Despite the physical toll of pregnancy, the exhaustion, and the endless to-do lists, she found comfort in building something entirely her own, untainted by betrayal. At every prenatal appointment, she marveled at the tiny life growing inside her. She would place a hand on her belly and whisper a promise. "I will protect you at all costs." That vow, more than anything, gave her strength. She refused to let Ethan Sterling's betrayal strip her of her ability to love and nurture. What she didn't realize then was that this small online store, born from heartbreak, would soon be the very thing that propelled her back into Ethan's world, on her own terms. 2 years passed quietly. Emma gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Noah. From the moment she held him in her arms, everything changed. The exhaustion of single motherhood was overwhelming, but each time he curled his tiny fingers around hers, the weight of it all felt lighter. Raising Noah wasn't easy in a tiny apartment, juggling bills and taking on part-time remote work for a financial firm. But she managed, and so did Noah. Her business grew steadily through word-of-mouth referrals, glowing customer reviews, and personal attention to detail. Emma handled every inquiry herself, packaged each order with care, and expanded her reach by collaborating with maternity groups and setting up pop-up stalls at markets. Meanwhile, Ethan Sterling's empire soared. His tech innovations dominated business headlines, and his name was constantly attached to billion-dollar deals. The tabloids, of course, were more interested in his personal life. Photos of him and Vanessa Monroe at exclusive galas flooded social media, branding them as a power couple. Emma's name rarely surfaced, except in passing references to the marriage that had ended in scandal. But beneath the glitzy facade, cracks were forming. Rumors swirled that Ethan's father, William Sterling, disapproved of Vanessa's influence over his son. Insiders whispered that she was manipulating company resources, making backdoor deals that even Ethan wasn't aware of. Emma read every piece of gossip with a strange mix of dread and satisfaction. Had Ethan really found happiness with a woman who was now betraying him too? One late evening, as she packaged another order, her phone buzzed with a notification, one that would change everything. Emma Caldwell nearly dropped her phone when the call came in. The voice on the other end was shaky, breathless, almost fearful. I have information." Emma's grip tightened. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, the woman whispered, "Vanessa Monroe is digging into your past. She's looking for anything she can use to destroy you. Rumors, financial scandals, anything to bring down Noah and Eden. She wants you ruined." Emma's stomach twisted. "Why are you telling me this?" But the line went dead. Her heart pounded. She had done nothing wrong, but Vanessa was cunning. She had the power and resources to twist the truth, to manufacture lies. Emma sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone. Later that night, she held Noah close, running a gentle hand over his soft curls. Was it safer to keep her head down? To stay quiet and protect the life she had built? Or should she prepare for battle? She was about to learn that fate doesn't wait for decisions. It forces your hand. Days later, an unexpected opportunity arrived. A major retail chain had discovered Noah and Eden through a glowing review by a well-known lifestyle blogger. The company wanted to partner with her, impressed by her brand's focus on sustainability and maternal wellness. If she secured this deal, her products would be stocked nationwide. It would change everything. But there was a catch. During final negotiations, she learned the retailer's expansion was partially funded by Sterling Enterprises. Ethan's company. Her pulse spiked. Partnering with them meant stepping dangerously close to the man she had fought so hard to escape. Emma turned to Megan, her best friend and unofficial business advisor. If I take this deal, I risk running into Ethan and Vanessa. If I don't, I lose a life-changing opportunity. Megan folded her arms. You built this business from nothing. Don't let them scare you into hiding. Emma stayed up for nights, pacing the small living room, watching Noah sleep as she weighed the risks. But deep down, she knew. She wasn't the broken woman who had once fled that penthouse in the dead of night. She was stronger now. If Ethan or Vanessa wanted to stand in her way, they would have to fight harder. She signed the deal. She was done running. Emma Caldwell had spent years preparing for this moment. She wasn't the woman Ethan Sterling had once pushed aside. She was a mother, a business owner, and a force to be reckoned with. Signing the deal with the retail chain was just the beginning. She was ready to fight for her future, no matter who stood in her way. The skyscraper's conference room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the breathtaking Manhattan skyline. A digital presentation board glowed at the front of the room, waiting for her to take control. Emma arrived early, dressed in a fitted navy suit that radiated confidence. She focused on her notes, fine-tuning the final details of her pitch. One by one, executives filtered in, offering polite nods and murmured compliments about Noah and Eden's impressive growth. She acknowledged them with a calm smile, but beneath the surface, her pulse thrummed with anticipation. She had been assured Ethan Sterling wouldn't be directly involved. His company's financial backing was in place, but he was supposed to remain at a distance. And then, at exactly 9 a.m., the doors swung open. Ethan walked in, commanding the room effortlessly. The air seemed to shift as conversations halted, all eyes turning toward him. He carried the same magnetic presence that had once drawn her in: broad shoulders, crisp tailored suit, and an air of quiet authority. But there was something else now. He looked older, a little warier, and when his gaze locked onto hers, Emma saw the regret buried beneath his carefully composed expression. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then he broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his voice measured but tense. She forced herself to remain still, to keep her emotions locked away. "I wasn't expecting you here," she said, keeping her tone professional. "I was told Sterling Enterprises wouldn't be directly involved in these negotiations." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "I don't usually attend these meetings, but I insisted on seeing firsthand what everyone's been talking about." She knew what he meant. This wasn't just about Noah and Eden. Emma didn't falter. She took her seat at the head of the table, flipping through her slides as she prepared to present. Across from her, Ethan settled into his chair, his posture stiff. The tension was suffocating, the drawn bowstring ready to snap, but she refused to be the one to break first. Emma Caldwell moved through her presentation with unwavering confidence, guiding the executives through a product line, supply chain logistics, and brand vision. Each slide reinforced her strategy, every detail sharpened through months of preparation. She refused to falter under Ethan Sterling's piercing gaze. He sat at the far end of the conference table, his presence an unspoken weight in the room. But Emma ignored it. She wasn't here for him. When she finished, the boardroom erupted in applause. Contracts were distributed for review, and several executives approached her with congratulatory handshakes, praising her innovation and market strategy. Ethan remained silent. Then, after a pause, he cleared his throat. "Sterling Enterprises is prepared to support the expansion, provided all conditions are met." Emma braced herself. "I must commend Miss Caldwell on her impressive growth strategy," he continued, his tone careful. Miss Caldwell. He had deliberately used her maiden name. The reminder of how much had changed landed like a blow. She gave a curt nod. "Thank you." She'd just begun gathering her materials when Ethan stepped closer. "Could I have a word?" His voice was low, mindful of the executives still filtering out of the room. Emma hesitated. The last thing she wanted was a private conversation, but she also knew avoiding it would only invite speculation. She sighed. "Make it quick." They moved to a quiet corridor near the vending machines, where the hum of distant conversations faded into the background. A tense silence stretched between them before Ethan finally spoke. "I've heard rumors about you, about the child." Emma's jaw tightened. The child? She repeated coolly. You mean our son? Ethan exhaled sharply, pressing his lips together. Noah. He's 4 now. The words seemed to settle over him like a weight, his expression momentarily raw. I know I have no right to ask, he continued, voice softer, but I'd like to meet him. Emma felt the urge to lash out, to remind him of the night she had spent alone, of the betrayal, of the years he had missed. But her anger was no longer hers alone. It belonged to Noah's future, too. If you want to be in his life, you have to prove you deserve it, she said evenly. I'm not the woman you left behind, and my son's well-being comes first. Ethan's sorrow was evident. But Emma didn't stay to see his response. She stepped into the elevator, doors sliding shut between them. Her heart pounded, but she had never felt stronger. Emma Caldwell had survived heartbreak once. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes, and no one, especially not Ethan Sterling, was going to take that from her. The deal with the retail chain catapulted Noah and Eden into rapid growth. Orders surged, new hires flooded her warehouse, and marketing collaborations filled her inbox. Late nights became routine, with Noah sometimes curling up in the small play area of her office as she worked through inventory updates and production schedules. But the closer she came to finalizing the deal, the more she sensed a shadow creeping in. The final contracts required Ethan's signature, but delays stretched for weeks. Vague explanations from executives hinted at unseen obstacles, and Emma knew sabotage when she saw it. Her suspicions were confirmed when an unmarked envelope arrived at her office. Inside, a single sheet of paper held a grainy photo of her hugging an old colleague from her financial firm days. Beneath it, a typed message read, "End your contract pursuit, or I will expose your secrets." Emma's pulse spiked. She recognized the man in the photo, a harmless lunch meeting from years ago. There were no secrets to expose, but a manipulative narrative could be spun for the right audience. She knew exactly who was behind this. Vanessa Monroe. Emma clenched the note in her hands, then fed it into the shredder. Bring it on, she muttered under her breath. If Vanessa wanted to play dirty, Emma was more than ready. She met with lawyers to fortify her brand, consulted PR experts to counter any smear campaign, and ensured that Noah and Eden would not be derailed. Then, to her surprise, Ethan reached out. He requested a meeting, discreet, private. Against her better judgment, she agreed. But on her terms. They met at a small cafe near her office. Ethan arrived looking nothing like the untouchable billionaire she remembered. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his once pristine suit slightly wrinkled. For the first time in years, he looked human. Emma folded her arms as he sat across from her. If this is about business, send your lawyers. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about business, Emma. It's about us. She stared at him, unflinching. There is no us, Ethan. But as much as she wanted to shut him out, a part of her knew this conversation wasn't over. Ethan Sterling sat across from Emma Caldwell, his posture tense, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Emma, he started, his voice unusually subdued. I had no idea about the blackmail attempts. I've heard whispers that Vanessa's been using some questionable tactics, but she keeps me in the dark. I'm trying to fix it. She studied him carefully, searching for signs of deception. Fix it? She let out a cold laugh. You're the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. If you wanted her gone, she'd be out. His jaw tightened. It's not that simple. She has board influence, shares in the company, and my father's health is failing. There's a lot at stake. Emma almost felt sympathy. She had seen firsthand how manipulative Vanessa could be, how she wove herself into Ethan's world like a parasite. But she refused to soften. Your problems aren't my concern, she said sharply. Just keep your people away from me. I won't back down. Ethan nodded, sadness flickering in his eyes. I understand. He hesitated before adding, but about Noah, I want to meet him, officially. I want to be in his life. Emma's spine stiffened, her protective instincts flaring. My son is not a pawn for you to use whenever guilt eats away at you, she said, voice like steel. If you want to prove yourself, rein in Vanessa and finalize the deal. Then we can talk about parental rights. Without another word, she stood and walked out of the cafe. Ethan remained behind, staring into his untouched coffee as if it held the answers to his past mistakes. Vanessa Monroe was not a woman who let go easily. When she caught wind of Ethan's repeated attempts to reconnect with Emma and their son, she launched into full damage control. First, she orchestrated a wave of rumors, strategically leaking to gossip columns that Emma was using Noah to extort money. Sensational headlines painted Emma as a social climber who had abandoned Ethan, only to return once his fortune had skyrocketed. The tabloids ran wild. Emma, however, refused to stoop to Vanessa's level. With the help of her PR consultant, she issued measured statements, emphasizing her brand's transparency and philanthropic mission. Public opinion began shifting in her favor. People saw her track record, the hard work she had poured into Noah and Eden, and recognized the rumors as baseless. And just like that, Vanessa's plan backfired. Instead of tarnishing Emma's name, the media turned its scrutiny toward Vanessa, forcing the world to question her motives. While Emma Caldwell focused on securing her retail partnership and expanding Noah and Eden, Ethan Sterling was unraveling a mess of his own. He had ignored the warning signs for too long. But now, the truth was in his hands. Documents exposing Vanessa Monroe's financial misconduct. She had been siphoning company funds, funneling them into a questionable offshore investment. Ethan confronted her in his office, slamming the papers onto his desk. "You lied to me," he said, his voice controlled but seething. "You manipulated my wife, and now you're stealing from the company?" Vanessa's confident mask slipped for just a moment, her eyes flickering with panic before she forced a smirk. "I saved this company," she countered, her tone dangerously sweet. "Without me, you wouldn't be where you are today. You owe me, Ethan." His stomach churned. Any lingering guilt he once felt toward Vanessa evaporated. He had been blind, but now he saw her for exactly what she was. "I don't owe you anything," he said coldly. "We're done." But Vanessa wasn't one to go down quietly. She had spent years embedding herself into his empire, and she wouldn't let go without a fight. She still had powerful connections, knew too many of his company's secrets, including financial risks he had taken in the early days of his success. If she fell, she planned to take him with her. Meanwhile, Emma remained unaware of the chaos brewing behind the scenes. She was too busy finalizing the Noah and Eden retail deal, managing bulk orders, and hiring a small team to support the company's rapid growth. Noah had become a fixture at the office, toddling around and charming employees with his infectious laughter. In those moments, Emma allowed herself to feel proud. She had built a stable life, free from the toxicity that had once suffocated her. But something felt off. On multiple occasions, she spotted unfamiliar figures lingering near her office or a dark car idling outside her apartment building for hours. A growing unease settled in her chest. She filed a police report, but with no direct threats, there was little they could do. She considered hiring private security, but every dollar she earned went back into the business and Noah's future. Then, late one evening, her phone rang. The number was unknown. She hesitated before answering. "Emma," a tense voice said, "my father's in critical condition. We need to talk. It can't wait." "Ethan." Her first instinct was to hang up, but something in his voice made her pause. Emma Caldwell gripped the phone tighter, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ethan, but I don't see how it involves me." A heavy sigh came from the other end. "My father is asking for you, and for Noah." Emma froze. William Sterling had never shown her kindness. Why now? Ethan explained that during one of his lucid moments, his father had demanded to see his grandson before it was too late. He had pieced together the rumors. Ethan had a child, her child. Emma hesitated. She wasn't doing this for William. She was doing it for Noah, so that one day he could decide for himself whether to acknowledge his father's side of the family. And maybe, deep down, she wanted them to acknowledge Noah's rightful place. A few days later, she arrived at the Sterling estate, Noah's small hand clutched in hers. The towering iron gates, the sprawling gardens, the grandeur of the mansion, it all brought back memories, both breathtaking and painful. Inside, staff members led her up the grand staircase to William's private chamber. Ethan was waiting outside, his shoulders tense, his eyes filled with quiet desperation. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. Emma gave a small nod, unwilling to let her emotions show. Together they stepped into the dimly lit room where William Sterling lay, his once powerful frame now frail, attached to an array of monitors. His gaze flickered to Noah, and something in his stern expression softened. "Come closer, child," he rasped. Emma guided Noah forward. The little boy, oblivious to the tension in the air, offered a shy smile. With a trembling hand, William reached out, resting his palm gently atop Noah's curls. Tears glistened in the old man's eyes, though his voice remained rough. "Sterling blood runs strong," he murmured. Then, his gaze shifted to Emma, shadowed with pain and regret. "I owe you an apology, for everything." Emma had once craved this family's acceptance. Now, as she looked at the once mighty patriarch, diminished by time and circumstance, she saw how fragile power truly was. She nodded, accepting his words, though she couldn't find her voice to respond. Noah, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed his tiny hand into William's. The old man let out a slow breath, his body finally relaxing. As the family gathered in vigil, one person was absent. Vanessa Monroe was nowhere to be seen. And that could only mean trouble. Vanessa Monroe stormed into the Sterling estate unannounced, a whirlwind of rage and desperation. Ethan, who had barely left his father's bedside, caught her in the hallway. "You're trespassing," he said sharply, voice low to avoid disturbing William. "Get out." Vanessa's hair was a mess, her mascara smeared from tears or exhaustion. She held up a tablet, her hand trembling as she thrust it toward Ethan. "You need me," she hissed. On the screen were financial documents, records of overseas transactions Ethan had made years ago. They weren't illegal, but they were risky, strategic moves from the early days of Sterling Enterprises when securing funding had meant walking a fine line. "I can make this disappear," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with urgency. "Or I can expose you, to the board, to the authorities, to the press. You cut me off and I will ruin you." Ethan's blood ran cold for a split second. But then he saw Emma standing nearby, Noah at her side. Their son watched the spectacle with wide eyes. Something inside Ethan hardened. He refused to let his past mistakes define him, not in front of his child. "Enough," Ethan said, stepping closer. His voice was steady, unshaken. "Expose me if you want, but we both know you'll go down too, for the embezzlement, the blackmail. I have real evidence against you, Vanessa. You don't control me anymore." Vanessa's face twisted with fury. "You fool," she spat, before turning her venomous glare toward Emma. "And you, do you really think you've won just because you had his child? You'll always be a charity case who lucked into all of this. This estate, this wealth, none of it was ever meant for you." Emma's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I never wanted your version of wealth," she said coolly. "I built my own." By now, staff had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. Vanessa's wild eyes darted between them before she let out a frustrated scream and flung the tablet to the ground, the screen shattering on impact. Silence hung thick in the air. Then, without another word, Vanessa turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving behind a trail of stunned disbelief. Ethan exhaled, chest rising and falling as the weight of years of manipulation lifted from his shoulders. Emma, without another glance at him, quietly took Noah's hand and walked away. For her, the past no longer mattered. Her future was waiting. Emma Caldwell hurried Noah away from the tension, not wanting him to absorb any more of the chaos that had erupted within the Sterling estate. Down a quiet corridor, she leaned against the wall, inhaling deeply. Despite her best efforts to remain composed, her hands trembled. This was the confrontation she had both dreaded and expected. Vanessa was finally unmasked. Ethan had made his choice, and the illusions that had once suffocated Emma were gone for good. In the days that followed, William Sterling's condition worsened, slipping in and out of consciousness. Ethan buried himself in corporate affairs, working to ensure a smooth leadership transition. At the same time, he moved swiftly to sever Vanessa's grip on Sterling Enterprises. An internal investigation confirmed her embezzlement, and once the evidence was compiled, Ethan turned it over to the authorities, ensuring she was shut out of the corporate world for good. A wave of lawsuits followed, marking Vanessa's dramatic fall from grace. Emma, however, refused to be drawn into the chaos. Her priority was Noah. She returned to her daily life, pouring her energy into Noah and Eden, caring for her son, and occasionally checking in on William's condition. A week later, the old man passed away, leaving behind a complicated legacy. To Emma's surprise, William's will formally recognized Noah as a legitimate Sterling heir. A trust fund was established in his name, ensuring his financial security for years to come. Emma accepted it on her son's behalf, but made one thing clear: she would manage it herself, ensuring Noah's future remained in her hands. Despite everything, she never considered rekindling her marriage with Ethan. The pain was still too fresh, and trust was not something easily repaired. Ethan, regretful but understanding, expressed his desire to co-parent Noah, hoping to build the relationship he had neglected for so long. Emma agreed, under strict boundaries. Their interactions remained measured, and any time Ethan spent with Noah would be supervised until trust could be rebuilt. The media had a field day. Headlines speculated about William's passing, Vanessa's downfall, and Ethan's attempts to reconnect with his estranged wife. But Emma ignored the noise. Her focus remained on Noah and Eden, which had quickly become a force in the retail world. Distribution deals placed her products in major department stores across the country, and international demand surged. Ironically, the betrayal that once nearly destroyed her had instead fueled the rise of an empire. Months passed, and Emma Caldwell finally found a place to call home. It wasn't a sprawling mansion with cold marble floors, but a warm, inviting house with a backyard where Noah could run freely. She decorated it with soft colors, cozy furniture, and shelves filled with children's books. Every corner radiated comfort, everything her old life had lacked. At night, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars, feeling something she hadn't in years: contentment. Ethan kept his word, proving himself as a father. He showed up for weekend trips to the aquarium, park picnics, and birthdays. Though Emma remained guarded, she acknowledged the effort. Over time, she allowed unsupervised visits, watching as Noah's laughter grew more effortless around his father. As for Vanessa Monroe, her name still surfaced in the media, usually linked to scandals. A court appearance here, a rumored affair with a wealthy investor there. She was desperate to claw her way back into high society, but her reputation kept serious business partners at bay. Emma felt no pity. One evening, Ethan stopped by to drop off Noah. The little boy ran inside, proudly showing off a toy boat his father had bought him. Alone on the porch, Ethan lingered awkwardly, his hands in his pockets. "Your house is nice," he said after a long pause. "Thank you." He gazed at the backyard, silent for a moment. Then, in a hushed voice, he added, "I know I can't erase the past, but I want to apologize again. Every day I wish I had been stronger." Emma met his eyes. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. "I appreciate that," she said simply. "Let's just focus on giving Noah the life he deserves." Their eyes met, an unspoken truce settling between them. They would never rewrite history, but at least the bitterness had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward separately, yet forever connected by their son. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Then, unexpectedly, the final note of Emma's revenge arrived. She was invited to speak at a prestigious women's entrepreneurship summit in New York City. It was a gathering of industry leaders, a chance to share her journey. Standing before hundreds of attendees, she recounted her rise from betrayal to empowerment, omitting names, but making the lesson clear: strength is built in the aftermath of heartbreak. And as she spoke, she realized something: she had already won. Emma Caldwell stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady, her presence commanding. "Adversity doesn't define you," she told the audience. "It's what you do with it that shapes your future." Applause erupted, followed by a standing ovation. This wasn't just another speaking engagement. It was a testament to how far she had come, from a woman betrayed and discarded to a powerhouse entrepreneur inspiring others to take control of their lives. As she stepped off stage, a group of women approached her, eager to share their own struggles. One young woman, tears glistening in her eyes, admitted that she had just left an abusive relationship. Emma hugged her, knowing firsthand what it felt like to start over with nothing but hope. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not proving anyone wrong, but showing others that survival was possible. Then, amid the crowd, she spotted Vanessa Monroe. Her once polished designer wardrobe had been replaced by something far more understated. Her usual arrogance swapped for something Emma could only describe as desperation. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Vanessa stood frozen, hearing the ovation, witnessing the success she had tried so hard to destroy. Whatever flickered across her face, envy, regret, or bitterness, Emma no longer cared. She had moved on. Vanessa, however, was still drowning in the wreckage of her own choices. Her downfall became official weeks later when the courts ruled against her. Found guilty of multiple counts of fraud, she narrowly avoided prison by surrendering all remaining assets to pay back the damages. The verdict sealed her fate. Blacklisted from the industry, her reputation irreparably tarnished. By contrast, Noah and Eden thrived. Emma expanded her brand into a full lifestyle company, opening flagship stores and securing international distribution. With her success, she launched scholarship programs for single mothers looking to start businesses or return to school. Every interview she gave emphasized how hardship had shaped her resilience, transforming her from a discarded wife into a formidable leader. Ethan, to his credit, remained a dedicated father. He was both financially and emotionally present in Noah's life, though Emma never allowed him to mistake their co-parenting relationship for anything more. They had found peace, but there would never be a second chance. 7 years after the night she had fled her marriage with nothing but a suitcase and an unborn child, Emma stood on the brink of her second major business expansion. Investors courted her daily. The media praised her charitable work, and yet her greatest achievement was what she had built for her son. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, she thought back to the terrified woman she had once been. Standing in the cold, abandoned by the man who had sworn to love her, she had walked away with nothing, and yet she had created everything. True independence wasn't about wealth, it wasn't about revenge, it was about standing on her own, building something unshakable, not just for herself but for her child. Because strength isn't forged in comfort. It's shaped in the crucible of betrayal and loss. Emma Caldwell's journey, from a neglected wife to a self-made success, proved that empowerment is a choice. Vanessa learned too late that manipulating others for personal gain leads only to ruin. Ethan discovered that fleeting temptations can cost a lifetime of regret, and that fatherhood carries a responsibility no amount of wealth can erase. And Emma? She learned that no betrayal, no matter how devastating, could suppress a spirit that refused to yield. If you found Emma's journey compelling, support this channel. Every like, share, and subscription helps us bring you more stories of resilience, drama, and triumph. Together, we can champion the power of perseverance and remind the world that strength is built, not given.